Hi, I'm Graham Abbey, and this is a special updated version of Studio Q. ASUS held a special General Assembly meeting last night to decide the future of funding for Surface. And although the meeting was open to all arts and science students, the outcome remains somewhat up in the air. Zainul Rajan was at the meeting last night, and she joins me here now. Zainul, wasn't there already a referendum held for Surface?
Well, you see, Graham, that referendum was essentially the topic of discussion at last night's meeting. Although 55% of the students who voted in the referendum voted against funding for Surface, that referendum was non-binding. This means that ASUS doesn't necessarily have to react according to the outcome. But in order to be fair in a split vote to such an important issue, ASUS held last night's meeting to decide whether or not the referendum should be binding. Despite their good intentions of giving students another voice on the issue, most people are just tired of all the bureaucracy involved in student government.
When is something binding? Like, when do we have the final vote upon the final vote upon the final vote? Like, I think the amount of bureaucracy and the sort of the lack of communication over who has what mandate in terms of political power, I think, should be addressed.
There is one word that could best describe the ASUS General Meeting held last night at Victoria Hall. It would definitely be confusion. Many Surface supporters came out in hopes to give Surface one last chance at survival, yet they were unpleasantly surprised to find out the implications of the meeting.
I feel blindsided. I came to this meeting to discuss Surface, and what I came to discuss now is a referendum, which is a referendum question and not a Surface question.
The cause of most of this confusion was the first motion that asked students if they thought referendum in 1993-94 should be binding.
If you have a referendum on a topic and it's passed and you say it's going to be binding after the fact, it does not make democratic sense. Okay?
The results of this vote were 66 no and 55 yes. Because ASUS President Jen Steeves was worried about the status of future referenda, discussion was put to a second motion. This motion would change the ASUS Constitution by making all referenda binding.
That it is binding immediately on ASUS Assembly. There's no further motions required. There's no further discussion required. Students say ASUS does.
The motion was voted for, but the implications of the outcome are extremely unclear. No supporters, such as Andrew Dick, seem to think that this motion implies the first motion is completely out of effect.
We just had a referendum, therefore it is binding upon ASUS Assembly, therefore ASUS Assembly cannot pass the Surface budget.
On the other hand, viewing this as a small victory, Surface editor Junie Lactapon felt that he could now use the meeting as an opportunity to raise new motions regarding funding of Surface.
ASUS will fully fund Surface out of existing funds until May 1st, 1994, at which time subsequent funding will be subject to individual opt-outs.
The exact implications of last night's meeting are impossible to tell. As of now, even ASUS is unsure as to what the outcomes of these motions really mean.
We have to deal with this as ourselves first before we can make any comments to you.
It is evident, as Mike Perry, former ASUS speaker, explains, that last night's meeting will definitely change ASUS's decision-making policies in the future.
The fact that, it could be a 51-49 decision, and then who's being really represented and should that result hold? If it's binding, it's going to, and I think that has a lot of interesting implications for the future.
So, Zainul, where does Surface stand now?
Well, Graham, that's a really good question because nobody really knows. If the vote that the referendum be non-binding still holds, then Surface still requires ASUS to approve future funds before it can produce another edition. And this would have to be passed through the General Assembly. If not, however, funding to Surface will be seized. It all depends on how Jen Steeves, Heath Grant, and the rest of the ASUS exec interpret last night's meeting. I'll tell you, Graham, I don't envy them at all. For such an emotionally charged issue, they have the option of acting on a referendum where almost 2,000 students were represented, or on a meeting where roughly over 100 showed up. Until they decide, we just won't know.
So when can we expect to find out, if in fact ever?
They are holding a news conference on Monday, and hopefully by then we'll have a better idea on the plan of action they intend to take.
Thanks, Zainul. We'll have the rest of the results of that news conference on next week's show, but for now, we return you to this week's show. Be sure to catch our documentary on eating disorders later in the show. So for now, we will return to Grant Hall, where we filmed yesterday's show as the engineers were setting up for their science formal tomorrow night.
Hi, I'm Graham Abbey.
And I'm Sharie Ross, and welcome to Studio Q.
We're on location here this week at Grant Hall for construction of the 94 Applied Science Formal.
On the show today, we'll see where recent Queen's graduates have gone and investigate some of the eccentricities of Queen's professors. And plus, we'll take a special look at the problem of eating disorders.
But first, we have news of an expulsion here on campus. The Queen's Senate expelled former student Stephen Coffin for 3 years for a sexual assault which occurred at an all-night house party here last spring. Mr. Coffin entered the woman's bedroom where he sexually assaulted her while she slept and then refused to leave the house until the next morning. The AMS Judicial Committee has recommended that Mr. Coffin receive a 7-year expulsion in case the woman wished to pursue any graduate studies here at Queen's. However, the Senate found that such a penalty was unwarranted.
It's been a rough week at the AMS, and at last Thursday's meeting, 3 of the AMS commissioners accused the executive of being unsupportive and disinterested in the work of their commissions. The conflict at the AMS remains unresolved. Steph Wilson has the details.
Tensions erupted at the AMS Assembly meeting last Thursday night when 3 commissioners strongly criticized the executive and the corporation as a whole. Their grievances focused on a general lack of support and leadership from within the AMS, prompting one commissioner to consider resigning from her position.
I just hadn't been seeing any satisfaction, and so I was hoping, in order to call attention to a number of problem areas, that through my resignation, people would start to pay more attention to those areas.
The commissioner's decision to voice these criticisms at Assembly surprised and disturbed some within the organization.
As members of council, we felt that, it was an issue that we were privy to and should have been privy to, and so I think that's really what upset us most, was not having known, seeing that we did pledge, our support for council.
Some of the criticism focused on Vice President Tim Wilson's comments that commissioners are middle management, being eliminated in other student governments.
I felt it was used in an aggressive manner. It wasn't appropriate within the context of the conversation. The conversation was about the lack of support within the AMS, and the quote just came out of the blue. I thought it was just said in order to make people be quiet because we didn't want to hear what we had to say.
But Wilson defends his comments.
It's my feeling, and I'll stand by that. The commissioners are similar to middle management. A lot of the duties overlap. For example, Kate and Taz are doing the same thing. And from my perspective, with the budget stressed as they are, we can't afford to be paying 2 people $10,000 to do that.
Todd Minerson also defends himself against accusations that he acted irresponsibly during homecoming, undermining the AMS's emphasis on safety during the weekend.
I think some of the things that are mentioned have been blown out of proportion. I mean, I live in a house with 6 people. There was going to be a party at my house whether I had anything to do with it or not.
But as the executive defends themselves against the criticisms, they acknowledge that some of the claims are valid.
I guess the problem is, and we've sat down and talked about this, is that we were getting caught up in our own jobs.
In order to deal with some of the problems in the AMS, the executive initiated a program of restructuring for the organization. A number of frustrations led to their decision to begin this process.
The AMS has been growing over the past 15 years exponentially, and it's all been cut and paste. It's been, oh, this is a good idea, we should be doing something about this. Let's put it right, close your eyes, move your finger around a little bit, there.
But some insist that the AMS's problems go deeper than structure.
We have lost touch with the students, and that's the biggest thing, and we have been out of touch for a number of years.
Mindset, I'd say it's definitely the unwillingness of people to change over the years. The way it's been, from what I've seen, looking at my files, it's just been Band-Aid solutions over the past 10 years.
But Minerson is hopeful that solutions can be reached during his term in office.
It means a great deal to me to get it done this year, and hopefully other people won't have to go through the same difficulties we have that are related to this. So, I mean, got all my fingers and toes crossed, and I'm knocking on wood all the time, so.
It's going to take a lot more than crossed fingers and toes to solve the problems the AMS is faced with.
The executive and organization as a whole are challenged with complex problems that go way beyond structure. These were made obvious through the criticisms voiced at Assembly. The proposals to restructure the AMS are due at the end of this month. These proposals will give students their first glimpse at the direction and extent of the change that now seems inevitable for the AMS. For Studio Q, I'm Stephanie Wilson reporting.
Still to come on Studio Q.
We define people by how they look, especially women. And until we stop doing that, and until women stop buying into it, it's not going to get any better.
The Hidden Hunger, an in-depth look at eating disorders. A Studio Q documentary feature. Later on Studio Q.
Carl Sagan, the famous astrophysicist, received an honorary degree from Queen's last Friday. He spoke at Grant Hall and explained his theories of the universe.
You know, my topic tonight is a question. Is there intelligent life on Earth? Perhaps you have an opinion on this.
The Faculty of Applied Science celebrated its 100th anniversary on October 30th, marking the day that the first Department of Mining Engineering opened at Queen's. Celebrations included a special convocation, an open house, and a free concert featuring the Arrogant Worms and the Mahones. Dr. Alfred Bader, generous donator of the Hurstmonceau Castle in England, spoke Monday night to a large crowd in Dunning Auditorium. Bader spoke about the importance of a well-rounded university education in both the arts and applied fields. The Rehab Society held a Rehab Awareness Week to inform students of the developments in occupational and physical therapy. The week included lunchtime displays and the Rehab Challenge, featuring disability simulation games like paraplegic volleyball.
Edward Said spoke at Dunning Auditorium on Wednesday. He is a renowned literary critic and political activist. He is well known for his influential critique of Western views in the East. Said's latest book is Culture and Imperialism.
As well, this week was Queen's first Rainbow Week, a time for gay, lesbian, and bisexual issues to be voiced and brought into public view. Rainbow Week is essentially a reworking of Gay and Lesbian Pride Week, which has been held in past years.
Activities this week involve movie nights, poetry readings, and the distribution of rainbow ribbons, which is the symbol for inclusiveness. Carl Sagan wasn't the only name to receive an honorary degree last weekend at Convocation. The list included a couple of Nobel Prize winners, including Claude Simon, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1985. On a more humble note, many more degrees were given out that will grace the offices of former students for years to come. And with their story, here's Josette Burns.
I have no idea if the jobs are out there or what's going to happen to me, but I just got to keep going. My parents keep telling me, do what you got to do, get your master's, and then get a career. And thinking, I don't think there's a career out there for me, so crossing fingers and hoping I'll get somewhere in life.
For 22-year-old Caroline Gunning-Trent, a long-awaited day has finally arrived. Last Friday, she and hundreds of other Queen's students were convocated at Grant Hall. And if life after Queen's is a frightening idea wrapped with mixed emotions, Caroline had this advice to offer her classmates.
Just, you gotta hope that someday you'll find what you want to do, and if you don't, you just keep walking that trek of education, getting more and more degrees, whatever you have to do.
Generally, students expressed optimism rather than the usual negative outlook on the merits of an arts degree. A number of Caroline's fellow graduates of '93 had vastly different career ambitions and ideals.
Paid off. Plans for the future. That's a really good question. Prime Minister. You know, it's a history degree, so I can do pretty well whatever I want, I guess.
But I'm already in a master's program. I'm working in my field part-time, so I feel really good about things.
Parents of fall graduates use the opportunity to reflect on times past with their child
It's
and
wonderful.
as alumnus
It's just
themselves.
like yesterday I was putting him on the bus for 4-year-old kindergarten and telling him not to cry. Laird?
I think it's great. You know, it's another step in the evolution of the individual, and graduates from the same building I graduated from in 29 years ago, I think. So.
Yes, and I hope he doesn't cry today.
Yeah.
In traditional Queen style, Chancellor Agnes Benedictson led the class of '93 to Grant Hall. An opening address by Principal David Smith was followed by the presentation of an honorary degree to Queen's alumni David Layton. Students were then called forth to receive their degrees.
Caroline Ann Gunning Trent.
Upon the conclusion of the ceremony, students and faculty gathered outside of Grant Hall to celebrate. When asked how it felt to finally have the diploma in her hands, Caroline had this to say.
It's a wicked day.
Other students appeared happy and relieved that this day had arrived.
They thought that they were going to be waiting until I received my pension. But
It seems that the future may not be as grim for graduates of the 90s as we have been led to believe. What it holds for this potential Queen's grad is another matter entirely. For Studio Q, I'm Josette Byrne reporting.
In the past, Alfies has been noted for its 5 o'clock lineups and its capacity crowd any night of the week. With the increase in competition of off-campus pubs, Alfies has been attracting fewer and fewer students. With the implications of this business bust, here's Scott Arnold.
So what is wrong with Alfies? Certainly when as many as 65% of frosh are underage, a bar historically frequented by many first years will be affected. The most serious problem facing Alfies management, however, appears to be a highly competitive Kingston bar scene.
We charge $2.75 for a beer or a single, and downtown most nights have drinks that are $1.25, $1.50, $1.75 the most, either all night or at least until 10. So if people have any money to spend, they'll go downtown.
I think it's an issue of people not having very much money, so they either go downtown and early and spend it on the super light nights, or else they drink at home first and then go out to a bar.
With the recent openings of several off-campus and downtown bars, offering the cheapest regular drink and pitcher prices is no longer sufficient to keep many students coming back to Alfies. The response to this inundation of competition is not as simple as matching the super cheap downtown prices.
But unlike other pubs in Kingston, we have to get our prices approved by the administration, by VP Williams. So that's why, say for instance, if we want to drop pitchers by $1 in price, no, there's no way he would go for that.
And like, if we had $1.75 drinks, even drinks for like $2.25 even, you know, if we are at least mildly competitive with downtown, I think people would choose to come here over going down to Curdy's or the Shot or wherever, because I think Alfies is the favorite bar of a lot of people in town.
So what, if anything, can Alfies do to recover some of its wandering clientele?
Trying to draw people down in a lot of different ways. In the near future, we're getting a new satellite bar. It's going to be a draft bar. It's going to be over in the far corner of the bar where the pool tables used to be. We're going to start serving pints. That'll improve a lot of things. It'll improve the service.
The question remains as to how Alfies can level the proverbial playing field without overtly promoting excessive alcohol consumption. To achieve a more direct relationship between the campus pubs and the liquor license holder, the AMS has got to convince both Vice Principal Williams and the Liquor Licensing Board that they are responsible enough to hold a license of their own. Only then can Alfies run more as a business than as a service. For Studio Q, I'm Scott Arnold.
Hi, this is Taser Lawrence of What's On Where. What's On Where takes you first to Alfies for some great live music. An AIDS benefit will be held on Saturday, November 6th. 10 bands will play from 1 p.m. to 1 a.m. Tuesday, November 9th, catch the student band Sausage and the Soul Shaker, while on Wednesday, November 10th, don't miss the Rhinos. You can warm up at the Shot on Thursday night with the Simpsons and Seinfeld. Don't miss Bedhead Fridays. Sunday, the Shot will host the Star Pool Tourney, while Tuesday, the Blue Knights will be back for another night of jazz. Downtown to Dr. Gertie's. Enjoy some of the Doc's cooking, all you can eat. Thursday is the Fine Arts Security Smoker. Sunday, don't miss the live band showcase or Monday Night Football. Wednesday is the Geology Smoker. Stop by the QP for some great live music unplugged. Friday night, catch the Bird Sisters, influenced by the Inuit Girls. Saturday night, Chris Gagare will play, while next week is dedicated completely to the early 80s. That includes movies at lunch and night. That's all, folks, for What's On Where this week. Enjoy your weekend.
Next time you're in class, take a look around you. Chances are a woman near you is suffering from one of society's most silent epidemics, eating disorders. For the past few weeks, Studio Q's documentary unit has been exploring the underlying causes of anorexia and bulimia. The result is the hidden hunger.
I lost my 3 years of university to the eating disorder. I hated them. It was a horrendous experience for me, and I would never want anyone else to have to go through that. My I've had anorexic tendencies, and now I'm dealing with bulimia.
Oh, you are right now?
Yes, it's a constant struggle. It's
Yeah.
not something that you sort of just get over. It takes a long time. It's a long process.
It is estimated that 90 to 95% of those people with an eating disorder are women. 1% of women aged 12 to 25 have anorexia, while about 10% have bulimia. On the Queen's campus and university campuses in general, these figures increase. Roughly 6% of young women here have a serious eating disorder, while 1 in 5 are at risk for developing one. This prevalence is frightening.
In terms of who does this disorder affect mostly, I think it's still fair to say that the majority of the population that suffer from these disorders or come to the attention of healthcare professionals are young women. The disorder usually begins in adolescence or late adolescence. It may not come to the attention or become a major problem till later on. Having said that, it can start as early as 7 or 6 years old of age, and it can start also as late as in the 70s.
Actually, probably the first time that it was ever brought to my attention would have been when I was about 7 or 8, and the first time I started dieting would have been about age 12. People often think that eating disorders are just about food. They're not really about food. The eating behavior is really just a symptom, and a lot of it is the underlying things. Socially, obviously, like the media is ridiculous because the people that they portray in the magazines and on the TV aren't realistic images of women. So as a woman in this society, I feel that I'm striving to be something that's not realistic. Those models are, about 3% of what the normal population would be, that size, and yet that's all we see.
There are a number of factors influencing the onset of an eating disorder. The causes are usually different for each individual.
It may have something to do with the influence of the media and how you see your body and what you think about is a healthy body. It may have a lot to do with personal kinds of issues. We know, for example, that there's a correlation between being sexually assaulted and sexually abused and developing an eating disorder. Again, an eating disorder may serve a coping mechanism. But perhaps the biggest risk factor is dieting and yo-yo dieting, very restrictive food practices.
I'm a firm believer that diets don't work now, so I can say, don't diet to people, but that's where it started with me. When I first started to worry about my weight, when you're growing up, or when I was growing up, there was a lot of pressure to be thin and conform. Hated my body. I've never liked my body. Body image is a real problem. It's probably one of the last things to go when you're dealing with an eating disorder in terms of the negative symptoms. Just absolutely hated my body. Never wanted to look in the mirror, was very depressed to look in the mirror, hated myself. My self-esteem was always very low. Compulsive exercising, felt guilty if I didn't exercise.
There are a number of symptoms that anorexics experience. Preoccupation with thinness and intense fear of becoming obese. Extreme dissatisfaction with body shape. Changed food habits and restriction of food intake. A sense of powerlessness over own life situation. Obsessive-compulsive personality traits. And emotional changes such as anxiety and depression. Bulimics also experience a number of common symptoms. Intense fear of becoming obese by losing control over eating. Dissatisfaction with body shape. Recurrent episodes of binge eating. Self-induced vomiting, laxative abuse, or excessive exercise. Fluctuating weight. And depression moods following binging.
I think that if we lived in a wonderful society and we lived with people that were fair and kind, we would be able to just take everyone and say, why? I think so many people look at society and they look at people and they look at the media and they don't question why we blindly believe in and subscribe to what the media gives us as an image of what we should be. I think it's ironic that when the women's liberation movement started, that's when the models started getting thinner. I think it's ironic that as women gain more power, not only does the ideal become thin, but it becomes thin and totally fit. We're meant to be whoever we are. And if that is thin, if that is medium size, if that is larger, that's okay. So I think that the change has to start with each person. I think that everyone needs to take a look at themselves, at their language, at how they describe their friends, at how they view other people, at the things that they value, because people will say, I'm not prejudiced, it's not important what you weigh, and then in the next breath they'll say, oh, you know my friend who, you know the big one, or the one that needs to lose a little bit of weight, or the really thin one. We define people by how they look, especially women. And until we stop doing that, and until women stop buying into it, it's not going to get any better.
If you know or live with an anorexic or bulimic person, there are a number of things you can do to help. First of all, be honest and open. Let her know that you wish to help. Insist strongly that she seeks the help of healthcare professionals. Do not force the person to eat, nor tempt her with her favorite meals. And finally, do not tolerate conversation that deals with food and weight.
I think that they are strange only relative to the rest of the professors.
His clothes?
Yeah, no, I haven't been to class in a long time.
Why would you want to grow up to be a professor? Maybe they're just sick of us?
The one that picks his nose while he lectures, that's pretty darn strange.
Because he's in commerce. I think it's the edible underwear.
They get off on math. What more can you say? Well, he dances during class. He does, he dances. He sort of
You can only read so much, and then your mind just goes, whoa. I have a great professor, so...
I don't know, I just think they're a crazy bunch. Probably the fumes of the Varsol or something.
His hair is bad hair. I don't know, they have no lives.
I think he has a drinking problem.
He's kind of, on a separate level of intelligence. He was above us all and didn't come down to us very often.
They all dress real bad.
They don't dress like this then?
No, they don't dress like this.
They're not that swift.
They dress in the 50s. They're from the 50s.
They're out there somewhere in their own reality and not realizing that there's 200 people wondering which reality they are in.
Definitely the way he dresses, I think.
Oh, geez, his armpits. They're just like huge and they're like all sweaty. They're biologists. They can't help it.
Well, I'm in geology, so it's the facial hair on them. It just gets to their brain and they're weird.
Coming up next week on Studio Q, hey engineers, it's science formal time again. Construction is well on its way, so be sure to tune in next week for a special feature on the night that most engineers have been anticipating for 4 long years.
The women's soccer team is amongst the best in Canada this year, but they really don't get the recognition they deserve. In the spirit of competition, however, Studio Q's reporter Erin Phelan has a story of their success.
The relatively empty seats at a recent game against Ryerson was not a new phenomenon for the Queen's women's soccer team. When it comes to showing support for our varsity teams, this university has been predominantly a football-oriented school. However, the enthusiastic fans that did come out to the team's home games this season were treated to excellent performances by the players of the #1 team in the Eastern Division of the Ontario Women's Intercollegiate Athletic Association. With a regular season record of 9 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie, a definite improvement over last year's 6 wins, 3 losses, and 1 tie, season player Sharon Jameson was asked what exactly was making this year's team so successful.
We're a really young team. We lost a lot of our starters this year, so it's just a lot of people learning, getting the ropes of being a varsity player.
This young team proved themselves both offensively and defensively this year. Scoring goals certainly isn't a problem for the Gales, with game scores of 7-0 and 6-1 against Ryerson defining their record. But it isn't athletic ability alone that has set them apart. The interrelationships and camaraderie amongst the players is a very important element both on and off the field. Rookie Kaylee Sullivan explains how this is the first thing she noticed about the team.
Because everybody supports each other outside and on the field, so for sure it does. It's a great team.
Going into the OWIAA finals this past weekend in Windsor, Coach Dave McDowell had this to say about the team's record and readiness for the challenge.
If you told me, 3 months ago that we'd be 8-1-1 with such a young team, I would have been flabbergasted. So, yeah, they've been terrific so far, and hopefully we can keep it going in the next weekend.
With bronze medals in hand, the Gales returned to Queens this past Sunday after successfully holding on to 3rd place at the finals in Windsor. And for a team that wasn't a sure thing, a team that relatively few knew about, the Queens women's soccer proved themselves to be one of the top varsity teams at this school. For Studio Q, I'm Erin Phelan reporting.
On Saturday, the men's rugby team played host to Carleton in the league semi-final match. For several years now, Queen has arguably been the top rugby school in the OUAA, winning the last 6 of 7 titles. The Gales did not disappoint on the weekend either when they thrashed the Ravens 32-3. This victory means that both the first and second teams will play for their respective championships this Saturday. The first team plays Western and the second face Carleton. Kickoff is at 1 p.m. at Richardson Stadium. The men's water polo team played twice last weekend, narrowly defeating Ottawa 13-11. On Sunday, the Gales were defeated by a strong Carleton squad 11-3. This split puts the Gales' record at 4-4 on the season, tied for 4th place in the league. Though not an officially sanctioned OUAA sport, Ultimate Frisbee has not only a large following at Queens, but also an organized team, and they hosted a tournament on the weekend. 8 teams presented themselves, and Queens was undefeated in match play. In other sports action, the women's soccer team traveled to the OWIAA Championships on the weekend. On Friday, they defeated Windsor 2-0, but lost in the semifinals to McMaster 4-0. This put the Gales in the bronze medal game against Western, which Queens won 2-1. Finishing in 3rd place in the OWIAA. Also, Jen Lowdy, Sharon Jameson, and Martha Hall were named to the OWIAA All-Star team. The women's hockey team faced McGill on Saturday and pasted the Red Men to the tune of 10-2. The men's basketball team hosted the Frank Tyndall Invitational Tournament on the weekend, in which they finished 2nd, losing narrowly to Bishop 72-66. The women's rowing team captured the silver medal at the OWIAA Championships with the lightweight double of Ann Butler and Kristen Bridges, and the heavyweight single sculled by Kristen Bridges winning individual honors. For Studio Q Sports, I'm Paul Bertrand.
It's giveaway time, and this week we have a Dr. Gertie's t-shirt as well as a wax strap, which is a watch strap.
So we have actually 2 questions this week. First of all, we found this thing at the formal. So if anyone can tell us what in the heck this is, we'll give you a prize. But if you can't, give us the name of one of the people who received an honorary degree at Convocation last week. Now this is only for the Thursday show, but if you want to, give us a call at 541-1040.
And also, if you have any comments or further questions about the documentary on eating disorders, give us a call at 545-6699, and we'll give you the numbers if you didn't catch them earlier on. And also, if you have any comments or suggestions or questions about the show in general, give us a call at that number. Or you can drop us a line at Studio Q, Room 22, JDUC, Queen's University, Kingston, K7L 3N6.
If you're looking for something to do this weekend, the Student Film Theater is showing Terminator 2 at Dunning Auditorium at 7:30, 9:30, and 11:30. So come on out if you want to.
And that's the show for this week. I'm Sharie Ross.
And I'm Graham Abbey.
See ya.